Plants, the green frontier. These are the discussions of the podcast Horticult. Its continuing mission to talk about strange new cultivars, to seek out new flowers and plant them, to boldly garden like no one has before. What's up, everybody? This is Blaine for the Horticult. In this episode of the podcast, we have a special guest, Cynthia Bee. She comes to us from the Jordan Valley Water District Conservancy Garden Park to talk to us about Localscapes. Localscapes is a way to help homeowners design and develop their yard into its maximum benefit in functionality, water conservancy, beautification. We talk about the 5 steps to create a Localscapes yard, 5 rules of lawn, weed control, and talk about all these sorts of stuff. She's awesome. She's brilliant. Let's get it on. I'm B Flane.
And I am B-Rad.
And we are the Horticult. Thanks for coming along for the ride. Today's episode, we have a special guest, Cynthia Bee. And Cynthia works as the outreach coordinator for Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District Conservation Garden Park.
Can't get much more governmenty than that name.
Yeah, I was expecting just the abbreviation.
I know, it's super long.
And you earned your bachelor's at Utah State in landscape architecture. Spent more than 20 years working in the green industry. Cool.
Yeah.
We're so excited to have you.
Yeah, welcome.
I am excited to be here. Thanks, you guys.
And you've been an awesome support to the podcast ever since it came out.
You know what? Gardening in Utah, there are so many of us that are doing it, and we just haven't been connected. So I love the work that you guys are doing with this podcast to try to bring that to the people, and just a lot of the groups that we've been creating on Facebook and things that are going on to really try to connect these folks that care about these issues with each other so that together we can make a lot of difference.
I didn't think that people would see it as an education, though, because we were just talking about plants.
Just kind of goofing around,
Everybody always says, oh, we're learning so much. I wasn't that interested in it, like friends and family or whatever, and we're learning so much, and then now it's spreading to people who work in the industry and maybe...
Like the place I learned the most about plants was the years I spent on, I call it my stay-at-home mom sabbatical. Was working pretty hard, but I had time to just be able to learn. So when the kids would go down for a nap or whatever, I'd jump on the internet and what are the new plants for this year? And I think that school is a great baseline for a lot of things, but it is no substitute for doing and just digging in and learning what you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when I first worked with Marinda with Brad. So I was in the Utah State. I had no experience with plants until I started Utah State. And there was, it was a month.
The change out.
Yeah. They just needed help. And I was like, well, let's try it. And in just that time, in 2 semesters of school and that 1 month of change out, I had made more connections of what I was being told with the combination of the work and study. Well, I was just blown away. I was like, this is it. Things were connecting. The little synapses were firing.
And it wasn't all just flowers and color. I mean, there's quite a bit of science involved in there that probably...
Yeah, the chemistry is fascinating.
Yeah.
And I almost kind of ruin it with people because every time everyone asks, oh, what do we, I have a brown thumb. How can I do it? Well, I'm like, well, we have certain elements to our soils that we have to overcome. and it's just they just go.
See,
forward.
So my whole job is trying to take all of the complexities and make them simple so people feel empowered to move forward. So yeah, my whole goal has been to try to figure out how to say fewer words and convey more information.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So where did you get your start?
Well, so I have always loved architecture. In the 4th grade, I found out that a house drawer was an architect, and I decided that's what I was going to do. But the caveat, I hate math, and math hated me, and I didn't want to kill people with bad architecture. And so...
the engineering portion.
Yeah, I had never heard. I mean, the thing was, when I was growing up a kid in the, late 80s, you just didn't hear about all the different professions. Y'all knew the baseline things, but we didn't hear about... You'd never heard of a landscape architect. I didn't know there was such a thing. And I ended up getting a scholarship by some miracle to Utah State, and that's when I found out about their landscape architecture program. And I thought, well, I know I like design. I know I like architecture. I wonder if I like plants. And so I got my first job at a nursery to see if I liked plants. And same thing, just thrown into the deep end of the pool and had to keep asking my poor supervisor a whole lot of questions about plants. But by the end of the summer, I'd learned quite a bit. So before I ever even started school, I was able to learn a lot about plants just by working at a nursery.
Wow, that's awesome. So it paid off to be curious and ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I've always found people in this industry are super generous with their time and their knowledge.
Yeah, for
like
sure.
No one has ever been like, haha, this is my company secret.
I'm
I
holding
can't.
this.
People have always been really generous, not just to tell me, but to show me what to do. So I'm excited to work in a job where I get to pass that along.
Yeah. You can applaud the trainer and or the manager that you had who was willing to teach you all of that. And that's super cool. That's kind of, I don't want to say that's rare to find in the industry, but there are definitely better teachers than others.
Oh, for sure.
And then now look at you.
Well,
that's what you do,
now
right?
You're teaching.
Training.
I guess, yeah. It's kind of a full circle moment,
Super cool.
So we bring up on the podcast a lot about Localscapes, how it ties into Utah and how to transform your yard into something that's not as wasteful as it used to be. You were the architect-ish.
I'm one of the folks that helped develop this technique. The Localscapes method was developed at the Conservation Garden Park. And part of the reason I think that it could come about is we had kind of a rare collection of people from across the entire spectrum of the industry all working together. So as a design nerd, I wouldn't typically have access in any other job to the maintenance person. So, maintenance people can complain that us, that we design people just design stupid things that look really good from 50 feet in the air and maybe don't work so well on the ground, right? Mm-hmm. But that's feedback I might not have gotten if I didn't work where I do. And so, we have people with landscape construction experience and all these different pieces. And we literally got in a room. I call it Dark Night of the Soul. It's probably my fault. It was a dark night, but we all got in a room and we just hashed it out. And the goal, we got a new boss that was really innovative. And he's totally a non-landscape person. So he's like, you have to convince me to do it. In the fewest words, go.
Ooh, wow.
And so it took a long time for us to figure out, how do we talk about this? What's the lowest common denominator? Because you always think, people want to know the things I know, and I'm going to share them in the way it was taught to me. No. There's so much information out there that people are overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. Give it context. Show me how to do it. Bring it down. And so the goal was, what is the least that somebody needs to know to put together a yard they're going to be happy with 10 years later?
See, that's
and 5 years.
Simplify, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the word of the day, is to simplify.
So like I know they listen to the podcast, but I write them out every time. My mom and dad change my yard. I cannot get them to, even in the slightest way. They have one little garden part where I built it myself. I made a little rock wall and did this stuff, but how do we change this idea that people have that it's a negative to be a xeric? I mean,
well, so we did a focus group in 2014, and this is where some of our change thought process, because the garden's been around since 2000, and so we've been working at this for a really long time. And I think the first problem that Xeriscapes has is the name. So Xeriscape was created by industry professionals, not marketers. Of course, in Utah, we speak Utonics. And people can't pronounce Xeriscape. They call it Zeroscape. So you combine that with the fact that, Xeriscape was actually developed in Denver. So a climate very similar to us. And the Desert Southwest grabbed a hold of it because they were in a change window where they had to change. They were kind of a little bit where we are now. And so it's just become synonymous with a Southwest style landscape. So people think it was intended to be regionally based design. But what it's become to most people is it's that cactus lava rock look. But what we found is opening a conversation with "you're wrong" is not a way to win people over. And so, we just thought, we'll forget everything we know, put everything out there. This focus group taught us something really important. And there was a gentleman in the group who I will be forever grateful to that had the courage to voice this. And he said, we equate conservation with sacrifice. I'm giving up something of greater value for something of lesser value for the good of everybody else. That's a hard sell. And everyone around the room was, nodding their heads like, yeah. And so it just kind of came to us that, look, if we want people to be able to do this, we need to create a solution for them that is an upgrade, not something they settled for, but something to aspire to. And so that really formed a lot of the foundation for Localscapes, is it needed to give them something better than what they had before.
I had no idea either. My upbringing and what I knew of plants, I knew lawn, I knew pansies.
Juniper.
We had a juniper.
Of course, the TAMs in the park strip, right?
TAMs,
Tangle
yep,
with those
yep.
on your bicycle.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah.
fall off.
Lilacs and irises. Like, that's it. Like, that is what I knew. My mom planted pansies in the spring every year, and I learned later that you do it in the fall. And she was like, no, they're going to die.
Yeah.
And then they're like, they came right back. I was
Did she have the geranium, the annual geranium? Like that was
we
like
get
standard
geraniums
for sure.
inside.
Okay.
Like, not plant people.
But just annuals in general, the whole idea of putting annuals in planting beds, that was the style back in the day. And that, honestly, without any help from us, that's shifted anyway. Annuals at this point, if you need, if you're relying on annuals in your planting beds, then you've done everything else wrong. You shouldn't need them for color. They're like a pop that you would do, like, a really cool dry your eye container.
Oh, there you go.
On the porch. And honestly, if you group them together into one spectacular container, it's way more noticeable than thinly spacing them in your planting beds anyway.
Totally.
So there's better ways
baskets,
to do that.
hanging baskets or something like that.
Yeah. So,
kind of container.
So when you're going to do the baskets, of course, we found that using the largest container you can afford is great.
Yep.
The smaller the container, the faster it dries out.
That's right. Yeah.
So, annuals are for containers, and then we want to use colorful shrubs and perennials and Utah happy plants in the rest of the yard.
So just real quick, is Localscapes another way to say xeriscape? I mean, is that...
Well, yes and no. So you can have a xeriscape can be a localscape, but a localscape wouldn't necessarily be a xeriscape, although they are always water conserving.
Okay.
But that's not the only reason. So the primary reason that people will xeriscape is because they believe in saving water. But what I had noticed from teaching students was that if I get on the whole saving water part of it, then I got to worry about their politics and what they think of global warming and everything else. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It's a supply-demand thing. Got to have enough water to meet demand, and we can only have so much supply, and demand is ever increasing. So it's simple mathematics. But what we had found is if we just talked about, hey, this is the best way to do it here. This is the best solution for Utah. This is what works here. Then everyone just got on board, and we didn't have to worry about politics and all those other things that can derail the conversation, because it doesn't really matter what your politics are. There's a reason to do this. Whether you're doing it to save money or to build curb appeal or make your yard more functional, create privacy between you and your neighbors. We found at least a dozen different reasons to Localscape. I don't care which one motivates somebody, as long as we can bring them to this solution that's going to work for them. So we don't have to change how they feel. We don't have to change their politics. We don't have to change their personal beliefs. We just have to show them how to landscape their yard. So it just made it a lot simpler. We're simply solving a problem they already know they have.
Perfect. I noticed the 5-step program you have.
Yeah.
That is freaking
Genius.
Unbelievably awesome. Like, it's so cool. Tell us about it.
So what we tried to do was make, because there's so much detail, as you guys know, that goes into creating a great landscape, right? So as we were creating the steps, it's like we have to figure out how to minimize how much information we have to give people and build a lot of things in automatically. So really there's 5 steps in a Localscape, and the first is kind of the most radical concept, and that is the idea of the central open shape. It can be square, it can be rectangle, it can be gently curving, it can't be squiggly weird, but just the idea that that we have this shape in the middle of the yard that we're going to orient the whole design around. And for most people, they're going to choose lawn for that. Some people are going to go lawnless or ground cover or hardscape, depending on the size of your yard and other factors. But generally speaking, that was an element that we saw that was missing. So even a lot of times in a xeriscape, they just replaced the lawn with plants. Oftentimes didn't even change how they were watering. So net water saved, and then it ended up looking kind of weedy and messy. And you'd find that, yes, you got that one guy to do the xeriscape, because it was so much and it was all plants, it got away from him, and then it turned off 100 neighbors. So you got one guy to do it at the expense of 100 other people wanting to do it. So we thought, well, with a Localscape, we might save a little less water over a xeriscape in most of the yards. But they catch on. They're aspirational. And
More
once we
desirable.
do it, once one neighbor does it, then they all do it. And if you get 100 people